And then there was a period actually, and this is after Stonewall, when I was a fugitive and living underground, where I was actually making my living as a gay hustler.
Mm.
Um, I hadn't come out really, but I needed a way to make money. I couldn't really get a job. I didn't have like social security number and things like that. Um, and I was intrigued by doing sex work, and I actually used sex work as a way to explore what it was to have sex with men. And I had a good time doing it, actually. I mostly enjoyed it. I did well at it. I made some money at it. Um, I managed to do it without ever having any really scary experiences or contracting any diseases. Why I had such a free ride with it, I don't know, but
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. Thank you for listening. I want to just remind you all that if you're not following us on social media, please do. It's always nice to interact with you all, and I'm always posting clips from the podcast, information about our free book club that's on Zoom, and all other kinds of exciting events, and a lot of literary posts. So Instagram is at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and so is our Facebook. We have a LinkedIn, a YouTube channel where you might be watching us now. So, hi, there's a video episode on YouTube. And our TikTok is actually my name. It's at Dr. Rimby. And Patreon is where you can find all the just uncensored, no ad episodes. It's patreon.com/ Ivory Tower Boiler Room. There's usually some kind of deal going on, and you can try it out for a few days for free if you just want to see what gets posted there. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. It means a lot. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you're following us. And I hope you all just enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm so excited to be joined with an author who has such an incredible story to tell you all. And I know you're all going to learn so much, hopefully, gain a lot of inspiration from his journey. So I'm joined with Jonathan Lerner, who has written the novels Lily Narcissus, Alex Underground, and Caught in a Still Place. His previous memoir is called Swords in the Hands of Children, about his experiences in the militant left in the 60s. He co edited the oral history Voices from Wounded Knee. For 4 decades, he's been a magazine writer and editor, and a longtime contributing editor at Landscape Architecture magazine, where his work addresses connections between the built and natural environments. And we're here today to talk about his new memoir called Performance Anxiety: The Headlong Adolescence of a Mid Century Kid, all about his background with gay sex, radical politics, rock and roll, and looming adulthood in the years before all hell broke loose in what we call the 60s. So, welcome to the program, Jonathan.
thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, I was so curious about, anytime I have an author on and I've never met them, I always like to jump into, okay, so what was that creative spark for you to even become a writer? How did that happen for you?
I first started writing when I was active in the radical movement in the 60s. There were what we called underground newspapers in many cities then. They weren't really underground in the sense of being clandestine or secret. They were counterculture, alternate uh, papers, and a lot of them are pretty flaky, but that's where I started writing for some of those. And also, I was a member of Students for a Democratic Society, which was sort of probably the biggest organization in the radical movement in the late 60s.
Mm.
And we had a biweekly newspaper that I wrote for and eventually was the editor of. Um, when I came out of my radical political period, which lasted for 6 or 8 years, And then I was looking around and needed something to do. It occurred to me that, I like writing, I like publication, and I knew something about it. So one thing led to another. Like many writers, I also did a lot of other things to get before I got established, like driving a cab and waiting tables. And then eventually cobbled together a life as a freelance magazine writer and editor.
What was bring us back to that 60s counterculture moment. Like, I'm so curious, what did that look like on a day-to-day basis? Like, is it as accurate as what Hair the Musical makes it out to seem? Or like the
Uh,
hippie culture and the radical political culture, were they like two separate movements, or was
it,
like the hippie
it,
culture part of
it was
it?
a spectrum, kind of. Um, there were the hardcore politicos who often were very skeptical or critical of people at the far other end who were doing a lot of drugs and weren't militant and maybe wanted to change the world by chanting or starting a commune in the countryside. But there were a lot of people at every point in that spectrum. I was probably planted more on the political side, but I was a big participant in the youth culture of the time.
Mm.
The music, the drugs, mostly marijuana, actually. I was sort of allergic to taking harder drugs.
Mm.
Um, but so it's hard to really pigeonhole how it was. It's like any other period or reality that there's so many differences between individual people. Um, but something that I think is probably hard to imagine is that there was a sense in general among young people, among many young people, certainly students, college students, that there was some big thing about to get rolling. Something big was happening, and we were all sort of part of it, and you could be part of it by just stepping into it. That might mean literally like picking up a picket sign and joining a demonstration, or it might mean hitchhiking to California and uh, having the person who picked you up hand you a tab of acid and you were high out of your mind on the way to California. Or it might mean just like going crazy with rock and roll. I mean, there were many expressions of the youth culture and the radical movement. It's hard to pigeonhole people in any one particular place.
Yeah. So how was gay sexuality during that moment? Like, was it something that was on the tips of everyone's tongue, or was it still kind of, like, how accepting was it, I guess, to be really openly gay in this
I'm
movement?
talking about the period leading up to Stonewall, but before Stonewall. I graduated from high school in 1965. Stonewall was 1969. And so what I've just described about the radical movement and the sort of beginnings of the youth culture mostly took place without a visible, open, critical, radical gay phenomenon. Of course, there were gay people, and of course, there were gay people having gay sex, but it was even in these sort of counterculture environments, it was often pretty much hidden. It depended who your friends were and whether you could trust them. And a lot of people in the more political end of that spectrum were quite critical because they felt, this is going to alienate the masses that we're trying to organize. The people who were more leftist, who wanted to organize working class people in factories and unions and things, were sort of afraid of long hair and drugs and expressions of sexuality. But there was this kind of flowering of open free love sexuality. It was called free love. It's never really free, but among straight people, it was facilitated by the existence of the birth control bill, which I think came in about 65. And suddenly, although you know, there are risks for everything, but suddenly it seemed to people that you could have sex safely and freely without worrying about people getting pregnant. And that sort of opened up this flowering of sort of sexual expression. And so they did make that made some room for gay sexual expression, but again, it sort of depended where you were, who were your friends, what kind of a community you lived in. That changed a lot after Stonewall because suddenly not only had the people at Stonewall physically fought the police, which was really radical. I mean, there was a lot of fighting the police going on, but it was fighting the police because the police were racist, or fighting the police because we were against the war in Vietnam and they weren't going to let us march to the Pentagon or something like that. So that was kind of unique and radical, but it also gave birth almost immediately to this, to a number of very public gay organizations, the Gay Liberation Front, the Gay Activists Alliance. And so there was just this kind of opening that made it more possible for people who were gay to be who they needed to be. I mean, as we know, it's like, it's an endless battle, or it's an endless evolution. Things are getting better in some ways. Now things seem to be getting worse.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is how some have said that we've returned to a very counterculture movement right now with campus protests, or like realizing how activism and intersectionality with identities, like it's not just one group's fight, like we all have to be united together. Is that something that's very reminiscent of what you were a part of, or is it different?
Well, it's reminiscent, but it's I mean, what's reminiscent is this sense of the need to resist the government. In those days, it was pretty specifically focused around police brutality, in particular in communities of color, and also the war in Vietnam, which by the late 60s was like just enormously exploded. I mean, there were 500,000 American soldiers there in 1967. And every guy who was 18 years old was touched by it because we all had to register for the draft. And so you knew people who were going, and you could get a student deferment, except when your draft board ran out of people to draft, you would lose your student deferment and get drafted anyway. So it was a very like threatening time for the guys and for the women who were their friends. Yeah, it's hard for me to say how similar this is. It seems so much more multidimensional. I mean, I feel like the attacks are coming so fast and in so many directions, as if it's like shock and awe, like the current administration is just trying to like blow everybody's mind as fast as possible. So it's hard to even figure out how to focus who's the actual target, who would be if you're organizing a demonstration, like what's the exact point of it? Where would you go? I mean, I find it really bewildering now, politically, and sort of less easy to wrap my mind around than it was when there were a couple of major burning issues. Now it seems like the whole world is a burning issue.
Well,
Not
kind
to
of
be
like,
too depressing about it.
yeah, but it's kind of like a wall of censorship in a way, or something I've realized is a lot of it seems about authoritarian rule, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we're going to enact policies that are illegal or unconstitutional, and we're going to show you that we're going to get away with it. Like that just feels very strongman Mussolini.
Yeah, yeah. And also the fact that there is actually a concerted plan, it's called Project 2025, to roll back all kinds of advances that have been made over the last generations in gender equality and diversity and public health, and anywhere you look.
Mm-hmm.
so it's a really hard, bewildering time now. And sometimes I feel like the fact that I have this kind of rich experience in a radical movement doesn't even seem to apply. Like I'm trying to figure out like how can I take what I knew, what I learned as a young activist and apply it now? I don't know. I don't know. I really don't.
Yeah. Well, it seems like though fomenting a rebellion against the government, like being active and very act up, learning the history of act up, I feel that that also showed a lot of lessons about eventually Dr. Fauci can't put his fingers in his ears any longer. And I feel like that's something that's happening right now is like the more and more there's unrest of like the people aren't going to allow this to happen. Like you're not going to take
Yeah.
away our democratic system. Eventually it has to reach the masses, right? Like eventually there has to be a toppling of change.
Well, I hope so. I also find it kind of frightening. Like, what's it going to look like? But I feel like a lot of people who voted for the current president are going to be hurt very soon by his actions. When they can't afford groceries anymore, and that may have a big effect in terms of bringing people into action.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that in the middle of out of all this ferment, some new leadership is going to emerge, some new voices that'll have sensible things to say. I hope that happens.
I hope so too. Well, kind of getting back to the 60s, like were you always New York City based? It seems like you've always had some kind of connection to New York.
Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C.,
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes.
in Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington. I was in New York quite a bit as a kid. My sister went to college there, and she's 6 years older than me. So once she went there, I often went up to visit. When I went to college in Ohio and dropped out after 2 years in 1967 and went to New York, and that's where I really got active in Students for a Democratic Society. I joined the staff. And I've sort of been in and out of New York ever since. For a long time, I lived in Atlanta actually for about 21 years. But then I met a guy and he lived in New York, and I moved back to New York to be with him about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So Washington, New York, I was in Chicago on and off for a couple of years. That's where the headquarters of Students for a Democratic Society was. I worked in that national office for a while. And Chicago also, as people know, was sort of a flashpoint location in the late 60s for political action. So I was there a lot.
Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episode, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tukalski, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, A Brief Guide for Busy Students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student-friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast suite dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
So this metropolitan connection you have with DC, Atlanta, New York, Chicago, did you feel like one city had more of a gay visibility, or did one area inspire you more when it came to your own coming out journey?
You mean way back then in the 60s and 70s? Well, I always, even as a kid, way before I realized that I was gay, or before I finished grappling with the fact that I was gay, which took a long time. I always understood that there was a gay world in New York because of the theater and the arts. And I didn't, I sort of had a glancing acquaintance with some people in that world. And I think, New York, it's not the only place that had a sort of burgeoning or nascent gay life. But New York is New York. I mean, it's at least it was the cultural capital. I think it still is the cultural capital. So it's a cosmopolitan place. So it's a place where there's more room to, even before Stonewall in New York, there was sort of more space for people to certain neighborhoods that were pretty safe. I mean, it wasn't completely safe, obviously. But I mean, I'm not sure whether it's that kept me in big cities. I mean, I actually just love cities. I like the buzz. I like lots of things going on. And a gay life is kind of part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, so, what year would you say, okay, this is when my coming out journey begins? Do you have a year? Do you have an experience? Or, because I know in your memoir, you talk about being with women and you open your memoir with losing your virginity and it's to a woman. So when does the coming out journey really?
I didn't come out until I was 42 years old. When I was a teenager, I sort of knew that I was gay and I was fighting it really hard. And that's sort of one of the meanings of the title of my book, Performance Anxiety. I was trying to perform being a straight guy because this is before Stonewall. There didn't seem to be any option. I mean, there was there were one or two teachers that we sort of suspected were queer, but nobody was open. There was no role models. There was no sort of open discourse or conversation or language that you could use. And there was a lot of forces in the culture that made you feel bad if you tried to embrace being gay. So everything from homophobic gym teachers and getting bullied at school to like reading definitions of homosexuality in encyclopedias that told you were sick. So through my teens, really, I was kind of fighting it. I was glancingly experimenting with gay sex, but I was also making myself, I was functionally bisexual. I was making myself have sex with girls in order to try to prove to myself and the world that I wasn't queer. There didn't seem to be anything positive about embracing being queer back then. Again, this is before Stonewall. I think that made a big difference. So I had sort of fumbling, scary, intriguing gay encounters in high school and after high school and college. Meanwhile, I was having sort of fumbling, unsatisfying sexual encounters with girls. And then there was a period, actually, and this is after Stonewall, when I was a fugitive and living underground, where I was actually making my living as a gay hustler. I hadn't come out, really, but I needed a way to make money. I couldn't really get a job. I didn't have like social security number and things like that. And I was intrigued by doing sex work, and I actually used sex work as a way to explore what it was to have sex with men. And I had a good time doing it, actually. I mostly enjoyed it. I did well at it. I made some money at it. I managed to do it without ever having any really scary experiences or contracting any diseases. Why I had such a free ride with it, I don't know. But so, when that ended, at that point, then I knew that I couldn't hide my desire for men, and I couldn't hide what I now knew about gay sexuality, and that I liked it, that I enjoyed it, that I wanted it. But I still felt the cultural pressure to be a straight guy. So, or to at least not be a queer, at least to be bisexual. So, I was married to a woman for 13 years. Eventually, what really brought me to come out after that period was a couple of things. My first book was published, and suddenly, like, I really felt like I was a writer. I felt like this is sort of, I had been a sort of patching together work as a writer and doing other things. And the fact that you have a book published doesn't mean you suddenly have a writing career. It's not like editors are then going to knock down your door. I was disabused of that pretty quickly, but still, it was a way to see myself in the world that was kind of, a strong person in the world. My book was published in England. It got a lot of notice there. I was there at the time it was published. And then right around that same time, my wife and I had been sort of living on the road. We were antiques dealers. I went from being like a revolutionary to the totally opposite world, which is like dealing in antiques, because I was so burned out on the one. I wanted to do something different. And we had mostly been driving around doing antique shows in different cities in the South for 10 or 12 years. And we finally decided to settle down, and we picked Atlanta because it was sort of geographically the center of our circuit. And we'd been through there to do shows a lot of times, and we knew a lot of people there. We're familiar with the city. So we decided to move to Atlanta. We bought a house in what we didn't realize was a sort of pioneer gay renovation neighborhood. Every time I went out to walk the dog, I was cruised in the park across the street. I pretty quickly fell in love with this guy that I met in the park, and ended my marriage and came out. I mean, it was way overdue, let's say. But coming out is hard to do, no matter when you do it, and it's always better to finally do it, as long as it takes.
Yeah. Do you still talk to your ex-wife, or like what was
No, we're not in touch. We haven't been in touch for a long time. That's a different story.
Yeah. So did you like see though through the decades, like, and even taking us through what you do in your memoir, I just love like how you, like, it's not just a coming out story, which is powerful itself, but it's like through your political framework, through just cultural shifts and changes. And was there like a decade where you realized, oh, this is like gay culture is really flourishing? Or like, was it the 90s? Was it the late 90s, the early 2000s? Like, do you remember like a watershed moment where like, yeah.
I don't really remember one particular time. I mean, post Stonewall, in my experience, there has just been this flowering of queer consciousness and queer openness. And it's, Atlanta was a big regional gay center, giant pride celebration every year. And I was sort of, in that world, but I've never sort of been exclusively in a gay world either. So, I think there's some people who think in terms of decades and milestones, and to me, it's more of a continuum. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, even your experience, do you feel that the way that you see straight allyship is interesting? Like, meaning straight men who are just really comfortable with their sexuality and being around gay men. Like, did you feel like ever that you were a shapeshifter? Maybe not a shapeshifter, that's not the right concept, but kind of taking on a different identity. Like, if you were in more of a gay circle, you had a different way of interacting than if you were mostly around straight men. Like, what was that experience like? It may be freezing here in the Northeast, but when I received my copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review, it warmed me up instantly. Their new issue is all about kink culture. Let me explain a little. I'm going to read what Jeremy C. Fox, the managing editor, has to say about this issue. He says, this issue marks a bit of a departure for the Gay and Lesbian Review as we crack open the bedroom door to explore the practices and paraphilias that interest or obsess some LGBT people and the roots of their appeal. Several future articles delve deeply into why certain kinks turn some of us on, and whether we can discern historical and aesthetic rationales behind these fixations. This magazine features articles such as The Power of the Foot. Oh yeah, they're going there with foot kinks. Mapplethorpe's Gift to America, Reclaiming the Sacred Dungeon. Tumblr was a gateway to kink, and Cruising with Boyd McDonnell. You definitely want to get your hands on the kink issue here. I have an exclusive promo code that those at the Gay and Lesbian Review have granted to you all. It is ITBR Choice. Enter it when you check out on the glreview.org. And you will get a free issue of the magazine. I hope you all enjoy your reading, and it'll definitely keep you nice and cozy.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Delmar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA plus people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Well, some, yeah, there are elements of gay culture, gay male culture that gay men use with each other. For example, when I first came out, my book had been published, and I had my first fancy magazine article published, and I thought I was going to be a writer right away, but actually I couldn't make a living. So I did what a lot of writers do, and I got a job in a restaurant. It so happened that the entire front of house staff in this restaurant were gay men, ranging in age from like 22 to 45. I was on the older end of it. It was like 6 or 8 guys. So we worked together every night. We went out drinking afterwards. They sort of taught me a lot of gay culture, a lot of gay language, a lot of gay sass. And jokiness, and that was like kind of a lucky place for me to land, actually. Even though I had gay experiences and known gay people long before that, I hadn't been sort of immersed in a gay world, and so that little bubble in that restaurant was kind of my training ground. And I worked there for a couple of years and ended up with a couple of like lifelong friends from that experience. So I suppose like in that context, I camped it up more than I normally do.
Yeah. Like, did you ever find yourself code switching, I guess would be the concept.
Not consciously, really. Not really, no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't wake up every day and think, oh, I'm a gay man. I just wake up and I'm just me. I'm not actually, I have a lot of gay friends. I live in a town that has a pretty visible gay population now. But it's also not really, it's one of my identities, I guess, or it's part of my identity. It's not like the center of my identity. And I was kind of, by the time I came out, I was already like, too old for a lot of gay nightlife to appeal to me. Like I never really hung out in the clubs. It was sort of post-disco. I was already in my 40s. I was already like kind of getting older and more tired by the end of the shift.
Yeah. Well, like, so what do you think now about, like, if you were born in 2000, like, do you ever think this young generation, like social media, TikTok, the way that, not that you don't think about coming out, but like, especially if you're on the East or West Coast, there's such an openness with like the metropolitan areas that it's kind of like, okay, you're gay now. Like, now what? Like, now you're part of a community, or like, there's just so many different ways of being in the world, of even opening the doors in ways that like didn't exist, or the paranoia was more intense in the past. So like, what would a Jonathan Lerner who was in this generation, do you feel like your life would change drastically?
I don't know. I find it unimaginable to think that I would have been born in 2000. And I know some people who were born in 2000 around then. I have a lot of nieces and nephews. But I'm still like an ink on paper person. I have a social media account because my publisher encouraged me to get some kind of like online presence, not because I want to do it personally. I don't live my life online. Of course I have a cell phone because like I'm functioning in this society and you have to have one, and they're handy items to have. But what do I do most of the time for relaxation? I lie on the couch and read books, like paper books, with ink printing in them. I don't do anything for pleasure online. Like I play games. I mean, I read the news online because you can't really get a newspaper anymore. But I have these old habits because I'm an old guy, and I'm 77 years old, and most of my life was before 2000. And that's going to be true unless I live to be 100.
Which could happen,
It could happen. I'm not sure I want to live to be 100.
Well, if you have your health, that would be good.
If I have my health, yeah.
Yeah. So, it's been so wonderful chatting with you. I mean, is my last question, well, there might be another, but something I did want to ask is, what was one of the most difficult parts of your memoir to write, and why?
Well, you might find it surprising that writing about having sex was not difficult for me. Partly because I've done it before. In my earlier memoir, I wrote about my period of being a sex worker, and I wrote about it really graphically and explicitly. So I'm over that. I'm over being nervous about that. The book is a lot about my family. It's about my childhood. My mother dying when I was 16, my father handling that really poorly. So one of the big things that I had to reckon with was how do I articulate my relationship with my father? He's not living anymore. We had a pretty brittle, chilly relationship. So trying to understand that and trying to figure out a way to portray it that was honest without being condemning of him. That was pretty hard. Otherwise, I find writing memoir really fun, strangely enough. Maybe I like to talk about myself. I don't know, but I know a lot of people who write memoirs are very sort of constantly in emotional turmoil about it. They're like dragging these truths out of themselves. It's not that hard for me to do it. I can't really tell you why, but I've done 2 of them now, and I actually think I'm probably a better memoir writer than any other genre of writing. I enjoy sort of going back and understanding what happened, to really trying to understand it. And one thing I realized writing this recent book was that even though it's about me, actually in writing it, I'm sort of creating a character who's called Jonathan Lerner, who everything he did and does and thinks comes from me. But it's like a different, there's this, I thought a lot about this phenomenon called autofiction that's sort of current in the literary world, where some writers call what they're writing novels, but they're just using material straight from their own lives. And I think here's another continuum between sort of autofiction, memoir, real fiction. Where do I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to really discern which something is. So, I mean, I call my book a memoir because I didn't make anything up. But I also realized that I was using the craft of fiction writing, the same sort of techniques to make a good story, and to, it has a story arc, it has a plot, it has character development, it has tensions that are resolved. So you know, in a way, I feel less able to even talk about the literary aspects of it now because it just seems kind of fluid to me between those different kind of types of writing.
No, that makes sense. And like, do you think that there's a certain ripe age for writing a memoir, or like, you could be in your 20s and produce a good memoir?
I think it's just if you have a good story to tell.
Mm.
Um, I think I had a good story to tell. The tensions in my family, the stuff about losing my mother when I was young, that's part of a good story. The fact of my very early, like even when I was in high school, my first getting involved in political action in the civil rights movement, um, which meant things like taking the streetcar downtown to the White House to walk in a picket line. Um, uh, when I was in high school, my friends and I we were suburban kids, white kids. We would go into the black part of Washington to the Howard Theater to see the Motown Revue, the Miracles and the Supremes and the Marvelettes. We would go into the city to kind of smoky bars to hear jazz performances by black jazz players. So, exploring, becoming aware of race and becoming aware of racial difference and racism, sort of trying to understand what that was as a kid when it wasn't talked about very deeply, certainly not by white people. So, I had a lot of good things to talk about. Another writer another version of me maybe could have written the same story 40 years ago, but I wasn't sort of ready to do it. Uh, that's another question. Why now? I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer. I have theories about that too. But again, I don't think you have to be like a senior citizen in order to write memoir. I think you have to be a writer. You have to want to write and know how to craft a story.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really so helpful to understand with the genre of a memoir, which
Yeah.
I just love what you do with your memoir. And, everyone listening, it's called Performance Anxiety by Jonathan Lerner. Um, and Jonathan has a website, right? What's your website, Jonathan?
JonathanLerner.info.
Easy.
Easy
Okay.
to remember.
So, it's been so wonderful having you on here. Any social media, because your publicist will be happy that people can follow you.
Yes. Instagram, Lerner Writer, one word.
Okay.
And honestly, I forget what my Facebook name was,
Well,
but
Instagram's helpful.
Instagram is
So
it.
learner
Yeah,
writer.
Lerner Writer and JonathanLerner.info will take you everywhere you need to go.
Good to all your books. They can
Yeah,
find
and
your
some
name.
other like videos of me being interviewed and things like that.
Oh, good, good. Well, this was such a
Yeah,
wonderful conversation.
yeah,
And
thanks very much for the opportunity. It was
yeah,
great.
of course, Jonathan. Well, and can't wait for more people to learn about your story. And it's such an important story to tell. So thanks for coming
Great.
on and, chatting with me.
Uh-huh. All right. Take
Okay.
care.
Thank you. Bye, Jonathan.
Bye-bye.